Welcome back everyone to the second session of the Research Networking Day. This session is entitled Embodied Listening, and the host of this panel will be Jovana Maksić, who is a neuroscientist who has done extensive laboratory investigations exploring the intricacies of both human and non-human brains. And her research delves into the spectrum of the interplay between culture, cognition, and sociality, shedding light on the nuanced evolution of these aspects in our world. And Jovana also maintains and moderates the Trust community. I think for the Berlin community, Trust is quite a well-known platform and place where you can also chit-chat with others who have very similar viewpoints of life, and also on computation especially. An experimental think tank exploring collective ways of reading, writing, and researching. And I'm very happy that this year we have also Trust on board together with Jovana. So the stage is yours.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Anita, for this lovely introduction, and thank you everyone for coming here and taking the time to engage in this dynamic research and networking day. So I would like to start with the introduction of our first panelist for Module 2, Embodied Listening. So, Ragnhild is educated in visual arts and has a Master of Fine Arts in Music and Sound from Milton Avery Graduate School of the Arts in the US, as well as Postmaster of Fine Arts in Sound Art from Royal Institute of Arts in Stockholm. She is currently a PhD Fellow at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts. May has been awarded the Carl Nielsen's Talent Prize, International Studio and Curatorial Program. In 2022, May was an Arts and Media Fellow at DAAD in Berlin. So please, let's welcome Ragnhild May.
My name is Ragnhild May, and I am a PhD Fellow at the University of Copenhagen and at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts. My PhD project is titled The Body as a Site for Composition, Rethinking the Relation Between Bodies, Gender, Instrument, and Sound. Instruments can be seen as an extension of the body. One can, for example, whistle using the mouth or the hands. So it seems like a simple prolongation to make a whistle to form a more powerful or varied tone. Therefore, it can seem as a given that instruments look the way they do. So instruments are shaped after the scale of the human body and the ear of the frequency spectra of the human ear. But why do instruments look the way they do? When did we settle on the design? So generally, Western musical instruments are shaped after one idealized body, the white, able-bodied cis male. So, new design theory tells us that all the objects that surround us are shaped with an idealized body in mind, the white, able-bodied male. So probably most of you have seen these research papers or articles in mainstream media showing us that a white man has a better chance at surviving a car crash because the car was simply designed and tested with this type of body in mind. And if we follow that line of thought, then all Western instruments are designed for the white, able-bodied cis male. And a research paper has dived into the scale of the main instrument in Western music, the piano keyboard. And that's designed for the hands of an able-bodied white male. And that, of course, doesn't mean that other bodies cannot be virtuous in playing this instrument. It simply means that this instrument has a certain bias towards that kind of body. So I see two main problems when thinking about music. One is that instruments in general are biased towards a certain kind of body type. And the other is that the instruments are designed for certain kinds of sound aesthetics. So there exists a whole range of sound phenomena that the instruments are not designed to make, and that we generally do not use when composing music. And one of these phenomena is called a difference tone. So a difference tone is a tone that can occur when you have two very high frequency tones playing simultaneously. What happens then is that a third tone occurs inside of the ear, and that tone is not part of the original sound stimuli, but simply is created inside of the ear. So you can say that the ear becomes the instrument itself, or what I tend to call the site for composition, so where the music happens. And that blurs the boundary between what is the listener, who is the body, and who is the performer. The term difference tone is sometimes also referred to as combination tone, tatini tone, ear tones, or inner ear distortions. And just to explain a little bit more about how it's created, I want to show this. This is a screen cap from a program called Maximus P, a software that I tend to use sometimes when creating different tones digitally. And here we can see one of the simplest equations for a difference tone. I try to keep it short, so I give a very brief and not so detailed view on it. It's more complicated than this, but the most simple kind of difference tone is when we have one frequency F1 and another frequency playing F2, then the third tone that occurs inside of the ear will be frequency 3. So the difference between the two original tones that are playing. So, and in the software you can see F1 and F2, and then over there with the red one is the difference tone that will then be happening in the ear. And story has it that difference tones were first found by Tartini, who were very excited about this phenomenon that happened then on the violin. And story also has it that this is something that Mozart really didn't like. So in this meme he says, what can be more terrible than one flute, two flutes? And that's because if you have two flutes, they're high-pitched instruments, then this phenomenon can occur, and it's something that's undesirable in his opinion. And next to it, there's also a little description, a visual description of how the frequency, how the difference frequency looks. So you have the two frequencies, and then the resulting frequency that is occurring in the ear is a low frequency. So you can see this. And here there's a person on YouTube just explaining it very briefly. And I have to say, I would love to play some difference tones for you, but it's simply not possible. You would need more time with speaker setup, and I would have to make an actual concert. So this will be more for a visualization, you could say, or just to get an idea of what it is.
Combination tone. The combination tone is a psychoacoustic phenomenon where extra tones are perceived when tones are combined. It also helps if they are loud, so you might bump the volume up a little. Don't damage your hearing though. Here is a tone with a 220 Hz fundamental, and here is one with a 330 Hz fundamental. If you listen carefully to their combination, you may be able to perceive a phantom tone at 110 Hz, and another at 550 Hz. These are the sum and difference frequencies of our two original tones. You can see in the graph that there is in fact no signal down at 110 Hz, but it sounds like there is.
So in my research, I like to think about difference tones or difference both as something that I can work with artistically, but also as a metaphor for thinking about ways of composition that differs from how we usually deal with instrument-bodily relations. So that leads me to my research question of how do different tones entangle the body of the instrument, the listener, and the performer? And is it possible to create auditory situations that similarly engage listener and instruments, making the body decide for composition? So, yeah, you can say I use this as a modality of, or as a, I see different tones as the most perfect example of the entanglements between body and instruments, and then use this as a way of thinking of where else these kind of situations can occur. But apart from that, I also try to create acoustic musical instruments especially designed for creating different tones. So there's been very few composers who's been dealing with different tones in the past, but it's mainly been treated as an phenomenon in electronic music, but it's very easy to create also with acoustic instruments. And the most ideal instruments are flutes, because they create a sine wave-looking sound wave. So I've been using a lot of woodwinds, and here are some earlier works. I'm currently in the process of creating the final versions, and here's another one from an older piece. Then here's another musical instruments that is designed for creating another psychoacoustic phenomenon. I won't dive too much into this, but just to quickly explain, it's in the same way as a regular organ, where you have 12 tones, but here each pitch is double. So instead of having one organ pipe, they are conjoined, and then I can tune them microtonally to create binaural beating, something that we see a lot when, for example, tuning an organ, but it's not. There is no instruments designed especially for creating this phenomenon. This is another project I recently did. It was actually shown in the room next door 2 weeks ago at the Ultraschall Festival. So it's a general idea that instruments can be seen as an extension of the body, but in a very singular sense. So what happens when it requires more than one body to operate an instrument, when each movement of the performers are entangled? So I've always been very fascinated by these unspoken languages that happen between musicians, that there's almost an symbiosis between the musicians happening when performing together. And that's also, I think, why I've been wanting to play music. I like this way of being together with people, having these unspoken languages. And I've been wondering if it's possible to make this intimacy even more extreme. So I've been doing this with this brass instruments that's fully modulable, so it can be put together in different ways and be built and rebuilt in different setups on stage. And during the performance, the musicians also put them together in different ways. And here there's what the musicians called French kissing with tubas, with the trombones. So they would describe how it's super intimate, that they could actually feel the vibration, the embouchure of each other. This performance was supposed to be for 6 players, but one of them had to skip out because he had herpes. So it is a really good example of why it's of how it's quite intimate, this instrument to play. And I want to end my presentation by saying that I'm in the very first stages of my research. I'm 1 semester in, so I'm very curious also to hear your comments and thoughts for my continuous research and work. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this really interesting presentation. I would like to start with a couple of questions that not only relate to your work, but also kind of feed onto the previous discussions that we had in Module 1. So my first question, when thinking about the body, you sort of address it as a site for composition. But would you say that maybe the body, and in your work particularly the auditory system, can also be seen as rather a collaborator? So I'm thinking in the direction of attributing agency, not just to other organisms or humans, but also to cells, bodily organs, sensory systems. So in this sense, we're kind of connecting it to Matthias's presentation and this idea of symbiosis.
Definitely. I think that's a very good point. More to think about the symbiotic quality of all collaborative qualities.
Great. Now my second question. You noted that when different stones were first discovered by Tartini, if I'm saying that's right. At the time, it was sort of like a fascinating phenomenon, but also it was seen as kind of like a artifact or maybe some kind of unwanted signal that we don't understand. Like, why is the body adding this signal? And it kind of made me think about artifacts in general when it comes to sound analysis or analyzing any kind of waveform. You always have the signal to noise ratio. So in this case, noise is something that you want to get rid of. But at least in the natural fields, I would say that the last couple of decades have been very formative in thinking about noise as a signal or as having meaning. So I guess my question is here, do you think that now we are experiencing a time also in the field of psychoacoustics, and particularly in your practice, where more emphasis is placed on these artifacts? And I guess the second part of this question is, since this is a very Eurocentric conception, do you know of any cultural differences where these types of artifacts, or maybe even different stones themselves, are seen as like wanted?
Yeah, that's a very big question. So I think it's a good point with the emphasis on noise and how that can also be or how there's been an emphasis on the qualities of noise, and that relates very much to the general field of unwanted sounds or noises that we can use and we can compose with, and more people seems to be interested in experiencing with their bodies, but that has generally not been used. And I think there is a growing interest in that. Yeah, as you mentioned, also my whole project is focused on Western musical instruments, because that's where I'm trained. That's the instruments that I know of, and I don't really know about any cultural differences. And I have to say also, to not make my topic too broad, I have narrowed down to only these instruments. It's already very broad. But yeah, I don't know of any. I know of some composers who's been using them, but it's been mainly explored in science, actually, more than music.
Right, maybe something to think about, since you just started a PhD and it can be taken in different directions. So then I have another question, specifically in considering the entanglement of the body and the instrument. What kind of implications does this have for accessibility of music creation and also performance for individuals who have, for example, physical or cognitive or psychoacoustic disabilities? Like, how do you think this could inform or expand on some of these limitations? Yeah.
Yes, I think that's also a thing, that the musical instruments are designed for an able-bodied, but it doesn't mean that non-able-bodied are not virtuous and are not able to play instruments, or are not able to listen to instruments or experience music. I think that's also a whole point in this field of embodied listening and embodied music, that music is not only for the ears, it's also something you experience in other ways, in other bodily ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're going to carry some of these thoughts into the Q&A session. Thank you so much, Ragnhild. That was great.
Thank you.
Now I would like to welcome our second panelist, Mariana Diaz. Mariana is a Brazilian-American scholar from Miami, currently pursuing a master's in visual and media anthropology at the Hochschule für Medienkommunikation und Wirtschaft in Berlin. For the past 10 years, she has been active in online radio and audiovisual translation, two fields now converging in her academic practice. Her current research interests include AI and conflict mediation, nonviolent communication, online radio websites, and auto-ethnographic radio storytelling with memes, the latter taking the form of a monthly radio show called Deep Fried DJ on Kashmir Radio. So with this, you can take the stage. Okay.
All right, so hi everyone. Today's presentation is about captions in video and sound-based media. First, I'll briefly explain what captions are, what motivated the research, share some theoretical perspectives about captions from media studies and art criticism, and then share existing projects that promote captioning and accessibility in the arts. So closed captions are subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing. In addition to dialogue transcription and or translation, captions also describe sounds and identify speakers, conveying important information from the soundtrack. So the term closed from closed captions comes from open or closed captions. So open captions are embedded in the video, which is maybe what you can see if you see like a video art piece in a museum that already has subtitles, while closed captions can be turned on or off, and this is what you can see like if you're watching something on a streaming platform and you can turn them on or off. But I also recently learned that in Europe, captions are referred to as subtitles. So in this presentation, I mean subtitles for the deaf and hard of hearing. But captions, as they're referred to in the US, developed within the context of public television, and this is relevant here because standardized captioning practices today are suited for dialogue-centered narratives. So standard captioning guidelines cover things like how many characters there can be per line, reading speed, how to break sentences, whether to use like brackets or parentheses, whether to use lowercase or uppercase, so very like styling and formatting related things. But when it comes to describing the sound, the guidance can be really vague. The general rule is to describe sounds that are important for understanding the story, but the language that we can use to describe sound can vary depending on who creates the captions. And this is when it gets interesting. So for the past 10 years, I've been working as an audiovisual translator, doing subtitles, voiceover scripts, and also editing captions for Latin soap operas and TV shows. But last year, I started creating captions for PAM TV, which is a streaming platform for video artworks and experimental short films from the Paris Art Museum in Miami, my hometown. And that's when I was like, okay, these are artworks, every single sound can be important, so how do I describe this? And then I was like, where's the artist? A lot of times, well, most of the time I didn't really get any input from the artists about what to describe. Why aren't they telling me what to describe? And so by creating these captions on my own, I really felt like I was making some aesthetic claims over these artworks, and I wasn't very comfortable with that. Then there were other videos that were like a bit easier. This example here, called Block Watching. This cheerleader character moves and lip syncs to mimic the sound of a car alarm. So here her body plays a more prominent role in describing the sound, while the captions serve to indicate when the sound starts and stops. So what and how to caption can really change from video to video. But beyond word choice for describing sound, I've also been asking myself, as a hearing person, who am I to make any claims about closed captioning at all? Like, who should really be involved in the process? Why aren't artists more proactive about making their video artworks accessible? And why are there entire video art collections that don't provide captions, that are essentially not accessible in that way? And where exactly are the gaps in this captioning process? And that's why I decided to turn all of this into a formal research project. So from the perspective of media anthropology, I'm curious about how captioning practices reflect conditions of access and technology, and also the different ways that captions can mediate experience for both non-hearing and hearing audiences. As Aline Romeo playfully describes in her essay, We Are Subtitles Captions, we tell you what went into it, who made it, and where it comes from. So now I'll share two perspectives, one from media studies and another from art criticism, that are like shaping the research. The first is this book, Reading Sounds, Closed Captioned Media and Popular Culture, by Sean Zdenek, and he's a professor and writer in disability studies, audiovisual translation, and media studies, among other topics. So this book is a rhetorical analysis of closed captions in TV and pop culture, and it positions captions as a potent source of shared connotative meaning and offers a comprehensive framework for thinking about captions as more than just sound descriptors. So this research, I would like for it to build on this book, extending the conversation from TV and pop culture into the realm of video art and sound-based media. So from the perspective of art criticism and more like a formal analysis of video and captions, video can be easily displayed, distributed, and reproduced, so copied, bootlegged. In her essay, The Radical Accessibility of Video Art for Hearing People, Emily Watlington suggests that it is the institutionalization of video art within the art museum that informs its preservation as an art rather than a media object, resulting in the belief that adding captions will alter the artwork. She argues that today, video works in a museum or collection are almost never shown in their original format anyways, forcing us to think about what we unquestionably accept as the original in a museum setting. So as she brilliantly points out, captioning embodies the spirit of access that motivated so many artists to use video in the first place, and that this is what museums and video collections should be preserving and perpetuating. So next, there are quite a few projects that are already asking and answering some of the questions that I'm raising today, and they're going even further and engaging with captions in critical and creative ways. The first is an online platform called Activating Captions. So in addition to an online exhibition of video works that's, I think, is no longer available, they feature artists that center captioning in their practice, and a magazine with essays about captioning from different perspectives. So the quote from one of the initial slides was from one of these essays. Then over in the UK, there's Caption Conscious Ecology, the Art of Captioning Research Group, and Voices in the Gallery. And I'll share the links to these projects in the end so you can check them out on your own. But I do want to show you a project from Voices in the Gallery called Voices Surface, an audio documentary about accessing Handsworth songs. And it combines voiceover, audio description, and creative captions to narrate a process of making a body of artwork accessible. So it's an accessible, you'll see. So last but not least, there's Kerfuffle, which is an open access and disabled-led experimental film and art working group who created the captions for Voices Surface, which we'll watch now. We'll watch a piece of it now. So as we can see, there's a lot going on for captions in the UK. And also, I guess, a warning, it has some references to violence.
A young white man pulls a milk float down a street. He passes policemen who are guarding an adjacent road. Smoke smoulders behind them. A chase. A lone black teen hurtles down a road. A black teen bolts down a road, outruns 4 policemen, misses the slash of a baton, is brought down by a shield. They kettle him in, officer after officer after officer, piling on as he struggles to rise. They, now 8 against 1, shove him against a wall, where children are sitting and watching. Dodging. 4 policemen. Narrowly misses the slash of another copper's baton.
When the guy's running down the road and the milk cart goes past and the police are chasing the guy, he was being hunted. And it was the sound of humpback whales that we've been playing around with, that was the through line, the lament.
Oh. So continuing on to access to other forms of sound-based media, specifically in online radio. In October of last year, Refuge Worldwide, you may know them here from Berlin, and they're also participating in the festival, started Mixed Feelings, a program of accessible multi-language radio shows translated via sign language, subtitles, and transcripts. The program also offers workshops about accessibility in music and the arts, two of which I participated in last year. And they were really helpful in introducing me to certain topics that I will also be incorporating in the research. And they have another workshop coming up this month, so you can check it out. I've also been experimenting with translation in my radio show on Kashmir Radio called Deep Fried DJ, referencing deep fried memes, where I combine meme descriptions, audio clips, and music. And then in the show description, I'll do a sort of alt text description of the memes, transcribe the audio clips, and then also translate them from Portuguese or Spanish to English. So in conclusion, this presentation was a sample of some relevant theories and projects that will help shape the course of this research, of which the goal is to identify a set of captioning practices for video art and sound-based media that prioritizes the needs and experiences of deaf and hard of hearing people, and holds artists and institutions accountable for making their collections and their artworks accessible, and also maximizes the expressive potential of video and sound-based artworks. That's it. So. Here, there's links to all the projects and also the entire film that we watched a piece of. Yeah.
Thank you, Mariana. I would like to ask now a couple of questions. So, here you go.
Testing? Okay.
Yeah. So, my first question, and just mostly out of curiosity, because in your bio, there's a part that sort of touches upon your research on conflict mediation and non-violent communication forms. So I was wondering if you can tell us a bit more about this.
Yes. This is referring to one of the projects I did for one of my classes called Anthropology of AI. And I used a popular meme of the confused lady, which is from a character of a soap opera, like a Brazilian soap opera that was really famous in the early 2000s and that I grew up watching and have many memories of. And this villain is super evil, and she was really adored by the Brazilian audience. And there's also so many toxic narratives of conflict that are constantly being perpetuated in these soap operas that I had also worked with a lot as a translator. So I used AI to try to re-script some of the stories in this soap opera. And I made a talking head out of this confused lady meme talking about nonviolent communication. And I'm mostly interested in how AI can help shape these narratives of conflict in pop culture. Yes, I hope that answered.
No, very interesting, actually. Also kind of thinking about cultures that like to enforce or encourage a culture of violence, where violence is normalized on a larger scale. And if you're interested, I have some case studies from the Balkans that I think you would be very interested in. So then my next question, in your work on captioning, how important is audience feedback, and particularly for those of audience members who rely on the closed captions? And also, how does this shape your approach to captioning sound and video art?
Yes, so in my experience creating subtitles and captions, we almost never get any feedback from the audience. And with this work with the Paris Art Museum in Miami, I was telling them that we absolutely need some sort of system for feedback and to include and involve the audience that is really relying on the closed captions. So this for me is pretty new because I'm like still learning like how to form maybe these research groups, or like, especially for this project, I would like to do like a participatory captioning project, maybe for like a video art collection. So I'm actually, this is all very new to me, like how to involve these voices.
Cool. I mean, it's nice that you are sort of shaping the method yourself and developing more.
But there are already projects that are doing this. I mean, I wouldn't be the first person doing like a collaborative captioning project. Absolutely not.
Fun. Okay, at least to recognize it. Yeah. And then my final question, perhaps a bit niche, but I was wondering, since so much of your research is heavily reliant on the practice of interpretation, translation itself, I was wondering if next to methods in like media anthropology, have you stumbled on the field of semiotics, like the field that deals with the science of signs and meaning making? So basically, how do certain signs or symbols transmit certain meanings?
Not so much like in my classes, but in this book that I referenced, Reading Sounds, he offers like this framework of how to rhetorically analyze like the language of captions, and I think, but not so much with semiotics, no.
Yeah, something to think about maybe. Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Mariana.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
And now I would like to introduce our third panelist, Jaka Škapin. Jaka is a Slovenian transdisciplinary performance artist and award-winning composer. Sound and Music Awards, Best Sound or Music at the Toronto Experimental Film Festival, Best Dance Film at LA Shorts Film Festival, whose sound is marked by meditative and expansive vocal tapestries, bearing the marks of his background in choral music, jazz training, and Slavic heritage. His work has recently been featured by the British Music Collection, the Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision, Düsseldorf's TIN Festival, as well as Nijmegen's IFNL Festival. In 2022, he premiered E-Man A PRS Foundation-funded solo performance combining an improvised vocal score, autobiographical narrative, and projection inner rituals of challenging patriarchal masculinity from within. So I would like to welcome Jaka now.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you. As I prepare this presentation, I have to say that for myself, I cannot really get past, firstly, over the title of this panel, the Embodied Listening. So for me, I must invite you to join me in an action, if you'd like. So my invitation is first to ground your feet, if you want, on the floor, to wiggle your toes, to soften your gaze, to soften the sides of your tongue. And also an invitation to return to your breath for a couple of moments, just for us to hear this room, first of all. Noticing the sounds of your breath, people next to you, the buzzing that is coming from all the digital devices in use. And now if you would like to, I have an invitation for you to just notice the other people around you, maybe to turn around, sound is permitted, movement is permitted, and just see if you would like to catch someone's gaze for a second, for a couple of seconds, and just to see how that feels for you right now in this moment. why did I ask us to do this? I guess for me, I sometimes, when talk is centered around technology and digitalization, as a vocal improviser, I always go back to this idea of my practice being one that asks, what happens if it's just our bodies and voices in the space? How does that impact our relationship? And actually, how would it be if for us, the regulation of our nervous system would be a potential aim of a musical activity? And hopefully that little example also gives you a sensed experience of this moment, no matter how that felt for you. So onwards to my presentation. I'm actually here to present about something very different to the official bio that you heard in the beginning. So I'm here to talk about Luminel, which is an artistic project between myself and Danielle Jones, the artistic director. I'm the musical director of it, and we run a Dancing with Parkinson's program in the UK, but recently also with the support of the BR Creative Europe funded project in Europe, specifically in Slovenia. So for those of you that do not have personal experience with Parkinson's, is a neurodegenerative disease, but in this context, we're really focusing on the lived experience of people with Parkinson's, their relationship with sound, music, and also the collaboration between people with Parkinson's as dancers, other dancers who do not have Parkinson's, and musicians as myself. I thought it was interesting to note a simple fact, for instance, that for many people with Parkinson's, they have a very particular relationship with music, with sound and groove. So many of them actually become their own DJs. So for instance, in the beginning of their day, they have to know what kind of music they would like to play for themselves that would enable their movement. Since one of the symptoms of Parkinson's can be, how it affects the muscles, the body, the ability to move freely. So a lot of them actually become really entangled with music in that sense, creating playlists for them based on their mood from day to day and based on what they would like to do, for instance, engage in a particular kind of movement. So moving on from there, I would like to particularly talk about the Collective Identity Project, which we completed in 2021, and is an exploration of togetherness and empathy and the personal inquiry into identity and collectivity, both on screen and in person. So we might ask, what is my role in this project as a musician, as a singer, as a vocal improviser? So as you can imagine, it's a dance class, and I am there to provide the sound for the movement. In terms of our practice, it started more so as a established community practice. You might imagine that a lot of people will be playing songs, or if I'm collaborating with someone older than me, that I might want to play a song that they might recognize, such as jazz standards or something like that. But over the years, we actually developed an approach based on collaborative improvisation that we then employ with people with Parkinson's in creating artwork, visual, and also a documentary, creating performances, and really delving into the themes of identity and collectivity. So this is an example of one of our classes. During the pandemic, we also had quite an extensive online program. So this is an example of a hybrid class where there were people participating in person, but also people participating from home, which I find as such an interesting question to pose. What is that relationship? So we think that through collaborative improvisation, we're actually able to have a positive experience on both ends. And I think the sound there plays a particularly important role. So how can I, as a musician, actually be focused on the people in the space and try to follow the nuance of their movement, of their expression, especially as they're also invited to sound with us. So how do I incorporate the sounds that I hear in the space? How do I incorporate the signals that I receive from them individually and collectively into a soundscape that supports the movement, that supports a particular, you could say, choreographic exploration, but also represents everyone in the space, in a sense, as one body, as one ecosystem, as one unit. I would also like to say that as part of our 2021 project, we decided that beyond just a class in a dance studio, we wanted to travel around the country and actually visit people in their home spaces, which was a very different situation from asking someone to bring an object to a dance studio or bring a story. In this case, we were actually traveling from home to home with people that we have collaborated for years, and for instance, improvising in their kitchen or improvising in their bedroom, sharing stories, movement, sound based on their memories, based on particular objects. And then that footage was then created and also forms a film series as well as a short documentary that I'm gonna be able to share a little bit later. And we also invited other artists into the space. So we collaborated with visual artists that came into the dance studio, and we also collaborated with writers, and that formed a physical exhibition that toured around the country, but also a virtual gallery that is still available on our website. If you would like to check it out, there's going to be a link soon. So I guess as you watch the next 3 minutes of the film, my question to you is, if you're an artist or even if you're not, what is your relationship to community practice? So how do you see your creativity informing someone else's a process or life, especially as someone who might not be a musician or who might not be an artist? And are there any questions that you would like to pose to yourself in that space? Yeah, I think that is enough of a question as we watch the next 3 minutes, which is an excerpt from our short documentary film.
He used the analogy of a swimmer, a champion swimmer, who at some point in his life must have been a non-swimmer. And he said the knowledge of who we once were stays with us. So that all those people I was once, like a wife, for example, I'm no longer a wife. That bit of experience is is a layer that will always be part of me. And in a way, that's why memory is so fascinating, I think, because memories are not just something that happened once. They become part of you, don't they? I think we make memories new every time. I don't think they live in a kind of cupboard in your head and can be pulled out at will. I think you have to write them every time. So that every time you remember it's slightly different because it's coloured by your present and I suppose all the layers that you've piled on since the last time you had it, last time you remember.
So I guess for me, what that brings up, it's definitely my relationship with those people on the screen, and the fact that obviously it was important for me to show that accept, because none of those collaborators of mine are here to speak for themselves with their lived experience. And I guess also the importance that I find in relating my practice as an improviser and sound maker to other people in this way. So my question is definitely of also how that relates to the overall festival theme, I could say, of the word sustain. For me, it brings up notions about sustained connection, of sustained engagement, and what is our relationship as artists to communities. So in this case, as part of this process of collaborating in a sustained way with a similar group of people, but also new people weekly, of meeting them as humans, of creating friendships and deep bonds between us and our collaborators. How does that impact the music, the art that we make, the choices that are placed in that? And that goes definitely both ways. So, for instance, in my experience of talking to our dancers, they definitely did not see themselves, most of them, as dance artists before entering the space. But as the focus of our time together was how do we collaborate as equals, and how they can create a new identity for themselves as someone that can be creative in this way, or someone that can be considered an artist. I think that's a really interesting point or of contact to consider. And also on the other side, there's a question, of course, of technology and how we used technology in these ways, and also in terms of our hybrid workshops and so on. But also, what is the relationship between that and the embodied knowledge that is definitely hidden or not so hidden in our bodies, and especially in our voices, and how the practice of vocal improvisation can carry those, I guess you could say, experiences seemingly magically through the air from one person to another. I think that for me, I just want to end with this notion of what is collaborative improvisation for me and how that might differ to free improvisation, because I know that free improvisation is more of a well-known term with quite a history tied maybe specifically also to Berlin and starting in the 1960s and so on. But I just want to pose this question because also I'm someone that is just starting to engage again with academia, and I'm beginning a doctoral program, so I'm really happy to be here at this stage, and I really welcome that discussion now or in the Q&A or even later if you would like to discuss how a different notion of collaborative improvisation with different value sets as presented through this project can support our connection with communities, non-artists, and the wider society. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this really fascinating talk that I think kind of encompassed many themes that we so far encountered, but also many themes that we are about to delve into deeper. So my first question, your work mostly centers on, or at least this one, on movement and this kind of participatory dance practice. So I was wondering, what insights have you gained on the nature of synchronization or synchronicity in general between bodies, humans, in movement and performance? And here I'm thinking particularly about several studies that I've encountered in the last couple of years, both in movement, but also in neuroscience and psychology. And they show that humans, when they dance together or even perform together, entrain their bodies physically, but also physiologically. So basically, these synchronicities are reflected on the level of the brain as well, which I found incredibly interesting. And also, the participants who would engage in these experiments also reported higher empathy levels and higher willingness to cooperate afterwards. So there's a very important psychological dimension. So I was wondering, if you can tell us more about what you learned.
I'm really interested in that research, and in some ways, it's almost as if every single time we meet in a dance studio, there's all these differences between how people enter. Let's say someone with Parkinson's, how they enter physically, with their posture, with their face, and how much their physicality, their ability to communicate with words, their posture, facial expression changes after 1 hour. So in many ways, those are felt experiences that we try then to also, put into words and interview people. But the feelings that are felt somatically after a workshop is our kind of main vehicle. And then you consider that alongside emerging research. But it's going to take science a lot longer to understand more. And it's almost as if in some ways we prioritize that felt experience of that without trying to dissect it too much, in terms of centering the artistic purpose of the project. However, on the research side, we have engaged also with researchers in different studies, such as one at the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery in London, but that seems to be a lesser part of our work, simply because of our natural interest as artists. However, I hope that in the future there's a lot more intersection and a lot more researchers, psychologists, neuroscientists, which I've already begun, but I hope that there can be bigger projects in the future that put together, a scientist and this kind of a group or this kind of a method and practice and try and understand more also about what is happening really in the brain and so on.
Yeah, and also what you mentioned, that there are these individual differences, even in Parkinson patients, but also in people who are, well, let's say, don't have a clinical disorder. There are still very significant individual differences in rhythm perception, groove, and this is something that science is only beginning to take into account.
Exactly. So that's why we're so fascinated with this idea of putting anyone in the space of collaborative improvisation, what that does to their sense of individual versus collective, and also what that does in terms of how they think of to what extent they're connected to someone else. And as we know about mirror neurons and so many other processes that happen in our brain if we mirror someone. And I feel that for me, centering embodiment and centering voice in that is really important and actually gets amplified. So for instance, if they would be just moving, that is kind of one level of the process. But as soon as you add improvised sound that specifically centers voice, they also say, as their experience, that the process of entanglement deepens, which is definitely something that I encountered and that I feel. However, there's no research to scientifically prove that, but hopefully in the future there will be.
I actually have a recommendation for you. There is a really cool center in Oslo, which is called Ritmo, the Center for Interdisciplinary Rhythm Studies. And here I think that they really incorporate different types of work with artists and designers and neuroscientists.
Yeah, so just to say that on the rhythm, that's the clearest path in terms of Parkinson's, in terms of the mobility. There's a lot of research on how a steady groove can support someone's movement with the symptoms of Parkinson's, but hopefully that in the future can also extend specifically to vocality and the nuances of, invented language or language and all the rest that we're already using.
Nice. Now I have another maybe quick question related to other facets of your work. Particularly, I'm very interested in this work on Slavic heritage. And I think that also in the film, we sort of got a glimpse of embodied knowledge and the importance of memories and rituals. So I was just wondering whether your work in general also sort of builds on this idea of embodiment and memories and even culturally transmitted knowledge.
Definitely. And I think within that, I would like to say that what is most important to share is just how we perceive that process as artists. So I know that if I can improvise, if I improvise by myself, obviously I'm in this environment, but I can focus on, let's say, a particular section of my vocality that might be linked to a traditional way of singing in Slovenia. But the interesting thing in this process is if I am really focused as much as I can, still being grounded, but improvising through someone else, through what they see of their movement, that's when I'm really interested in how that changes my perspective of my own art, my own voice, and what actually comes through. Because there is this idea of also musical identities that we bring to this process. And I do find that sometimes through that transmission, we are able to tap into the musical identities of individuals in a space through improvisation that come out through different information and also form a collective identity that is represented in that sound.
Great. Thank you so much, Jaka.
Thank you.
now, actually, you can stay. Yeah. I would like to invite the other two panelists for a Q&A and open up the space to the audience as well. So maybe while we settle first. And don't forget you have water. Very important.
Hello,
lubricant.
maybe just a quick word. Thank you all for the very interesting topics and discussion. As time is just flying by so quickly, we will only be able to take up to 3 questions from the audience, just to let everyone know.
Okay, so do we have any questions maybe? Maybe I could try to lubricate the floor a little bit and start off with my first question. And then if you think of something else, we can build on that. So I would like to go back to the theme of Sustain, this year's festival theme. I wanted to ask all of you, essentially, what role did specific knowledge communities, or maybe we can even frame them as epistemic communities, play in the process of conceptualizing your work? And in particular, what practices, interdisciplinary practices, you think are crucial for maintaining and also sustaining and transmitting knowledge? And how did these inform the way you thought about your projects? And here I'm thinking, when it comes to knowledge communities, we have institutions, academic institutions, but then we also have subcultures. We have different types of communities. There's a sort of culture around certain types of knowledge, right? That's what I mean by epistemic communities.
It seems like you're all looking at me for some reason. So I will try to answer. So I think all my work stems from being in different subcultural communities, even like back in art school when I started to take up music again, like after having been trained in a girls' choir as a child, and I had to skip out as a rebellious teenager because I couldn't really take this authority any longer, and starting to then play music again was a big freedom for me, because I could suddenly use my musicality in other ways. I started playing in several noise bands, and it seemed like such a great way of being together with other people and learning together, creating something together, whereas like in art school it's so much focused on the individual and each person as their own brand. So I feel like in visual art, it's not really so common to collaborate as much as it's possible in the music community, where it's quite normal to just everybody's like sort of playing in each other's bands, and you can jam for like one concert and then not see each other again, or just meet somebody from a different place and you just play together one time. Whereas in arts, we are so focused on our individual projects. So I think that's something, this community building that exists in music subcultures is very inspiring, as also a side of knowledge production.
I guess I can go next. In the field of like audiovisual translation, but also in accessibility, there's this format of like the guideline, or how to do things like step by step. And I think this is really informing like my research and wanting to find out like, okay, what's a systematic way of creating captions that that people can like follow specific rules, or to be able to produce captions in like a very consistent way. So I think this format of the guideline that comes from accessibility and from translation is something that's heavily informing the structure of, or more like the outcome of the research, but I'm really open to it not being that at all. Yeah.
Cool. Would you like to add something?
Maybe just quickly, that what comes to mind is, how do oral traditions exist in this space? So if we're talking about, an oral tradition that is based on vocality, how can we include that embodied knowledge also as part of those communities? Because, for instance, since you asked before about, for instance, pre-Christian Slavic knowledge, nothing of that is really written down. So how do you even engage with that conversation? So it's just a little question, really, not much else.
Okay, so maybe we can now take another question. Anything in the audience? I think we have a question over there.
Yeah, thank you so much for your interesting talks and insights in your artistic work and research. I have a very brief question about the role of empowerment in your work, in your research. How important is empowerment for you?
Empowerment.
I think empowerment, well, it depends how you define it, I guess, but the way it translates to me is that it's essential. Obviously, power is an interesting concept. When someone says power, does that automatically give us a negative connotation? I mean, I guess if we think about, process systems of power, that can be negative. But I would say that there's many different ways of also reincorporating the word power, also with a positive connotation of agency, right? So I guess from that sense, from that point of agency, empowerment is something that hopefully is essential to every step of the process. I guess for me, I relate that to especially collaborative improvisation as a space where there's no leader. So everyone decides for themselves what sounds are they going to make, right? But again, does that fall just under the idea of free improvisation, or how much of that is shared under a unified vision or a value, or how much of that is based on aims such as, as I said at the beginning, of regulating our nervous systems? If that is the aim of an improvisation, how does that change the process and the way people engage, even with a word like power?
Would you like to add something? No, that's fine also. Okay, any other questions? The last question, in fact. Okay, we have one in almost the final row.
Thanks again. This is more directed for Ragnhild. Is the experience of a combination tone particular to the individual? And that's easy, yes or no. The second part is it tied much more with like the advent of amplification, sound system culture?
So as it is created inside the cochlear of the listener, and because all our bodies look different, it will be different for each person. And there's also a lot of, not a lot of, there is some research that also shows that it also, it can be experienced in different ways depending on other bodily factors. What was the other part of the question?
I realised that difference tones were discovered before electrification, but is it also a lot to do with amplified sound and perhaps the unsustainability of subjecting ourselves to high volumes?
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. As I also mentioned, it was story has it was discovered by Tartini. We don't really know that, but yeah, he took the claim to fame. But I think the most prominent composer who's been doing the most work with combination tones, difference tones, or as she calls it, ear tones, is the composer Mariana, who was an electronic music composer who died in 2012. She did like very large installation works. She had a piece last year at CTM Festival that was restaged by some of her former assistants. Yes, definitely that has to do with with amplification and electronic music. But it's also interesting that people think it's mostly something you create with a computer or electronically, when you can actually like make it in nature and it's occurring spontaneously in nature.
Thanks very much.
I think that we are out of questions. I see that there's a hand, but how are we with time? Yeah. Oh, or we can take it. So yeah, we can take your question.
If it's a short question, a short answer.
Yeah, rather short question, thank you. Because you mentioned the cultural appreciation of artifacts or not, and your opinion, I would be interested in your opinion, how is that related to marginalized groups, like people who like noise music or industrial, it was niche genres, or, yeah, that is more or less your reflection of that.
Was this for Ragnhild or?
Yes, rather. But
you're at the line of fire.
Marginalized could be also, are there people who have a condition maybe, and what is their taste? Is it then more to the normalized? Or?
That's a very interesting question, actually. I mean, I don't want to like take too much of this, but I think the artifact maybe is in itself sort of, it started off as like this noise or something that's not wanted. It's like a side product, but then, as you say, in these marginalized communities and in niche subcultures, it kind of became the core value. So maybe that's more of like a larger cultural question rather than like a sociological, I think a big question for the time, but.
Yeah, I'll see if I can answer it. An anecdote: when I was a small child singing in the choir, and the organ would sometimes be tuned, then I would listen to these beating patterns that would then occur, and that the tuner would use as a tool to hear when the pipes were in tune. And I found those beatings like really bodily and fascinating. And I think that was like my first experience with something like that. And then later on, when like diving into different kinds of music, I realized there's like subcultures that are using this as compositional strategies, also like with other kind of bodily effects. So like, as you say, with noise music or club cultures with like extreme low frequencies. I think it's just within the subcultural genres, there's more room for experimentation. So that's maybe the main reason. And it seems like also in Western music we sort of we are a bit stuck, not a bit stuck. We are stuck in an understanding in classical music, at least. Like instruments really look like they do, and there is an aesthetic, and then the experimentation tends to happen in the more experimental genres.
Okay, I think we're out of time. Thank you so much again, everybody, the panelists, for the lovely talks and for the questions. Now we take a small break. 20 minutes. Yes, perfect. Thank you again.